Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Box Office Talk. This is the show where I break down what happened at the box office, see if my predictions for the top 5 are correct, then make predictions for next week's top 5. So let's get right on into it. Last week I predicted the number 1 would be The Nun 2, number 2 would be The Equalizer 3, number 3 would be My Big Fat Greek Wedding 3, number 4 would be Barbie, and number 5 would be Blue Beetle. And I was doing so well. I got 3 out of 5 of my predictions right for this weekend, which, hey, pretty good. A lot of you got, close. Not enough for a perfect 5 out of 5. There was one movie that some of you started to predict, just not in the right spot, but, that was a blind spot for me. I didn't know this movie was coming. A lot of the times, when it comes to these kind of movies, I just have no idea that they're coming. So let's just dive right on in. Number 1 was, of course, The Nun 2. And since the first Nun made a lot of bank for not just Warner Brothers, but for the Conjuring cinematic universe, as it is. So with this one, it was kind of like, okay, we're getting the sequel to one of the most successful ones, so how is that going to, fare against not just the first Nun, but the series as a whole? It opened with $32 million this weekend, which is on a budget of $38.5, but, worldwide, it is already sitting at a total of $85 million, so it's already doubled that budget, so it's already in a solid spot. But I did want to point out, since we've gotten that out of the way, that technically, yes, it has already doubled its budget. You can say it's a success. It's definitely going to be able to triple it. I did want to point out, though, the stats. For the Conjuring one, it's kind of right in the middle. It's not at the highs of where the franchise has been, but it's not really at, like, the lows. And yes, I count La Llorona, even though I think a producer even said recently, like, no, we don't count that. And it's like, you have to. You have to count it, because the same fucking character from Annabelle, the 2014 Annabelle, is in that movie. You have to count it. Point is, I count that one. It's just kind of right in the middle, but compared to The Nun, it had an opening weekend 21 million below where that one opened. So it's kind of like, and the thing about that movie too, the original one, is that it opened pretty big and it, made its money, but then it had a pretty big drop off in the next weekend. So, and considering kind of how, like, solid this opening was, and then next weekend we have another movie that I don't think it'll be like the biggest hit in the world, but I think it will, have its fans. I just don't see this one holding over that well either, similar to the first movie. So right now, though, for the Conjuring films, it is 22 million away until it outgrosses La Llorona, which is the lowest grossing Conjuring film domestically. Worldwide, it needs 38 million until it outgrosses La Llorona, the lowest grossing Conjuring film worldwide. So it'll have a ways to go. I'm not saying, oh, it's a dud, because like I just said, it just doubled its budget. It's fine. But it is interesting to point out, like, yeah, compared to that first one. And of course, I don't know how much promotion will factor into, like, do people even know it's out? Because I feel like I keep seeing ads for this on YouTube all the time. I don't know if it's people who are like, oh, I saw it the first time. I got burned the first time. I don't want to come back for it. But like I said, this is still a pretty solid opening for this. You know what I mean? I mean, look at the Meg 2. No longer in the top 10, but that didn't open, as much as the first movie did, and it hasn't grossed as much as the first movie did, but it's still a success. And that's also Warner Brothers. So there you go. Let's move on to number 2, which is The Equalizer 3, making 12 million. This one did have about like a 60-ish% drop from last weekend. So it made 12 million this weekend, but that adds to a domestic total of 61 million. It is 41 million away until it outgrosses both the original film and the sequel. So we'll see how that goes. Like I pointed out last weekend, these Equalizer films stay pretty consistent as far as where they end up. So that's why I'm counting both. Worldwide, it is sitting at 107 million. So it's 33 million away from officially doubling its $70 million budget. And the thing about the other 2 Equalizer films, like I said, they're consistent. Those films also just kind of squeak by doubling its budget. They didn't triple it as far as I remember. Like, they just they double it and then they just get a little bit over, which was enough to fund this whole trilogy, I guess. So like I said, this is still pretty consistent. It needs 85 million until it outgrosses the previous 2 films. So right now it's at least on track to double its budget, which is, I'm sure, what the studio is maybe a little bit more concerned about. And since this is supposedly the last Equalizer film, I don't think they care too much if it outgrosses the other ones or just gets, close enough. Like I said, consistency. If it can just get close, that's fine with them, I'm sure. Moving on to number 3, though. Oh my god. My Big Fat Greek Wedding 3. Now, the thing about this one, the original film is kind of an anomaly to me because it opened in limited release and it kind of, got word of mouth and it didn't expand right away from what I could tell from, like, the weekends, but it just, over the course of that year, weekend to weekend, it had a short amount of money added and then another one, and it got into the millions millions at some point, but it still wasn't big enough, but it still kept adding and adding and adding, and it became one of the highest grossing films of that year. Like a pretty big shock that movie, you know, because of the rollout, had that kind of effect. And then My Big Fat Greek Wedding 2 didn't had the same kind of rollout. It opened up with Batman v Superman, got kind of buried, lasted sort of a little bit, but, you know, no one really, I don't think anyone really remembers that there was a 2. Now we have 3, and yeah, let's point out the opening. It made 10 million this weekend, which is 7 million below the opening for number 2. And that's what's wild, is that, you know, with My Big Fat Greek Wedding 2, that opened up with Batman v Superman, which had a significantly higher opening weekend than The Nun 2. But still, you know, pair these movies up, pair the sequels up with the big new IP, the Warner Brothers IP of the weekend, and it just doesn't do well for them. And this time it was a little bit worse. It did open 10 million above the original's opening weekend, but like I pointed out, you know, that was because it opened up in limited so many times, it seemed. And then as far as the other 2 films, it needs 49 million until it outgrosses number 2. Not going to happen. Worldwide, it is only sitting at 12 million, and it needs 80 million until it outgrosses 2. Not going to happen. Unless, that's the thing about this movie, is that it is such like a vacation to Greece kind of commercial of a movie. Essentially, and I've noticed this for the other 2 movies as well, they're very much so low stakes, cast and crew are just kind of hanging out, Adam Sandler equivalent movies. You know, that's the thing that I got from those ones, is that they're not particularly that funny to me, and there's not really a strong plot driving this thing forward. It's just events that are kind of cobbled together that have some humor, and humor is in quotes depending on your sense of humor, but, you know, things end and any, you know, drama is resolved almost kind of immediately, or in a way that, you know, presents itself as low stakes. So, you know, maybe the fact that this is like a Grease commercial, essentially, maybe that'll bump it up if it hasn't been released in Greece yet. I don't know, but still, it's just not looking like it. I didn't get a budget for this thing, but since the first movie had a budget of 5 million and then the sequel had one of like 15 to 20 million, I'm gonna estimate that this one probably cost just a tad bit, like maybe 20 million exactly. I've seen the movie, I've seen number 3, and it's, even though they travel to Greece, it still doesn't feel like that expensive of a movie. You know what I mean? It's a commercial, but it doesn't feel like a big adventure to this new location that these movies haven't gone to. So yeah, I don't know, man. Maybe they're in a good maybe the budget's even lower, but I don't know. Maybe it's in a fine spot, but as far as the franchise as a whole, I'm surprised that after 2 that they were like, yeah, let's just go one more time. Anyways, number 4 is the big, you know, out of nowhere movie of this weekend, Jawan. I've heard a little bit of things about it, so it's gotten me a little bit interested to see this movie if I can ever see it at any point. It made 6 million, which adds to a domestic total of 7 million, because I believe it opened up on a Wednesday or just a day earlier than it normally would. Worldwide, according to Wikipedia, it has already grossed about 386 crore. So that must be good, since the budget is 300 crore. I'm assuming it's good. I don't know. So sometimes I'm stupid and I don't know things, and I unfortunately don't have too much to add other than congratulations, you topped number 5, which was Barbie, about to slip out of the top 5, which is kind of surprising. It made 5 million, adding to a domestic total of 620 million. For the all-time domestic runs list, it is a couple 100,000 over The Last Jedi, so it is 3 million away until it outgrosses The Avengers, and then it is the number 11 highest grossing domestic run ever, and then it's almost in the top 10, which is crazy to think about. Fucking Barbie. I think I knew, like, it'll probably make some money, but I never expected this kind of outcome. I don't know how many other people expected this kind of outcome, but, you know, well deserved for a movie that is having a lot of people talking and, you know, touching a lot of people's hearts, you know. And worldwide, it is now sitting at 1,402 million, so it has outgrossed Age of Ultron by 7 million, and it needs 51 million now until it outgrosses Frozen 2 and gets to the number 13 spot for the worldwide run. So all good. It's like I keep saying, it gets kind of boring because I have nothing else to talk about because it just keeps breaking all the records in the world. So let's move on to number 6, which is Blue Beetle. Like I've been saying week to week since it came out, like it's been having like a solid enough hold, like definitely better than the holds that The Flash and Shazam 2 have had this past year alone. But still, it is still far away from doubling its budget. It made 3.7 million this weekend, so that adds to a domestic total of 63 million. It has outgrossed Shazam 2 by 6 million, and it is now behind Birds of Prey by 20 121 million. Worldwide, it is sitting at 114 million, and it is still behind Shazam 2 by 18 million. So there you go. Like, it's still slowly getting past 100 million, blah, 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 but it still is yet to double its budget, which, you know, ranging from 100 million or 120 million, either way, you need to get at least over 200 million to be considered a success at this point. And I still don't think you can really call this that, unless they were able to save up some money on doing promotion, because there's very few promotion for this, so maybe their marketing budget is even lower. I don't know. Either way, let's move on to number 7, which is Gran Turismo, making 3.3 million, adding to a domestic total of 35 million for Neil Blomkamp. It has outgrossed Chappie's domestic run by 4 million, so it needs 58 million until it outgrosses Elysium now. Worldwide, it is sitting at 93 million, so 12 million away from getting to Chappie, but 7 million away from getting to 100 million worldwide, so maybe Sony will consider that an achievement. It still needs about 27 million to double its budget, and I'm not sure if it has any other places to roll out worldwide, but it's just not looking great as far as actually doubling that. And even if it does at this point, it's kind of like, is it one of those situations where it needs to make even a little bit more, and just getting to 120 million isn't enough? Like, for example, outside of the top 10, because this movie isn't in the top 10, so I couldn't talk about it, but Asteroid City just crossed over $50 million worldwide, which is exactly the doubling point of its $25 million budget, and I'm sure at this point it's made just a little bit more than that. And I feel like for that kind of movie, for Wes Anderson, I feel like that you can consider that a success. You know what I mean? Because he uses the fact that it costs 25 million at all with that cast and just that visual aesthetic that is so beautiful that you can't find anywhere else. It's like, it's shocking that it's even that low compared to the ugliest blockbusters that cost like 200 million, or in the case of Justice League, 300 million. So it's like, I feel like that isn't like, that's a safer bet. Like, oh yeah, that's a success, them exactly doubling their budget. But for something like a Gran Turismo, where if it, even if it does cross over its doubling point, it's kind of like, well, do you need a little bit more, though, because it's that kind of movie? It's a product placement kind of movie? I don't know. Or the fact that it's a Sony movie and they're promoting Sony products is that way effect. I don't know. Let's move on to number 8, which is Oppenheimer. Definitely a success, making 3.0 million, adding to a domestic total of 315. So for the Nolan filmography, it's still behind The Dark Knight Rises by 133 million. And then for the 2023 list, like I said last week, and it entered the top 5, it is still behind Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 by 43 million. So I think this is definitely winding down. I don't see this holding over as much anymore, but if they do release it again for like potential award season, maybe, depending on how popular it is. I don't know, and depending how much more it makes while it's still here. Worldwide, it is sitting at 891 million, so it's 107 million from The Dark Knight, and for the 2023 worldwide runs, it's behind Barbie and Super Mario. It needs 468 million still until it outgrosses that. So it's still, some people are still saying that the worldwide rollout is going to keep on going, and it could end its run at $1 billion, like potentially, like that option is there now, which is the fact that this kind of movie has made as much as it has already is shocking. You know what I mean? The fact that now people are like, it could hit $1 billion. That's even more insane. Like, come on, man. That's amazing. Let's move on to number 9, which is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, making 2.6 million, adding to a domestic total of $111 million. It is still behind the original film by 24 million. Worldwide, it is sitting at 161 million, so still behind the original film by 41 million there, but I think I already pointed it out last week, and it did double its budget, and it's now made 21 million over that doubling point. I can maybe see it tripling it if it can make that additional, what is it now, 49 million to get to that triple point. But I mean, the fact that it did already double it, and there's already other things in the works as far as what to do, and that there is a strong word of mouth around this, I'm sure they will look at this movie and compare the success of like this and then Into the Spider-Verse, because Into the Spider-Verse, even though that one technically made more money than this one, that one was kind of like a moderate hit. And then they, went with the sequel. It's been a couple years, and fans, spread the news that the animated Spider-Man film is really good. People saw it later when it hit streaming or DVD, and then boom, bigger box office for the sequel, bigger hype, bigger anticipation, and now there's an even bigger hype for the next one. Whenever they get to that, because, strikes and all. but the point being, I could see that happening for the next Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie if they do decide to make that. I know they're working on a TV show, so I don't know. Let's move on finally to number 10, closing out the video, Bottoms, making $2.05 million, adding to a domestic total of $7.6 million. I saw something saying like it was expanding to a couple other theaters, and I'm not saying it didn't, but but I was kind of hoping like maybe, you know, in the back of my head, maybe it'll bump it up, you know, maybe it can squeak into the top 5, you know, but I think there is a solid, at least, you know, small scale word of mouth going on here. People have been seeing it. It's just not enough to double its $11.3 million budget, which is unfortunate, but I definitely see this movie kind of becoming a cult classic years down the line. It's definitely not there yet. Right now, this is the kind of, you know, box office run that could eventually lead into talks of like, this movie didn't do well, but it's actually really great, and then more people discover it, and that's how it gets its cult following. Anyways, now it's time for the fun part, the predictions for next week's top 5. Number 1, I have to go with A Haunting in Venice, because even though Death on the Nile, it, you know, came out at kind of a weird time for the box office, I think now we're in a better place, and also there are still fans for this for the series at least, you know. Orient Express did make a lot of money, and Death on the Nile, I think if it was released at a better time, that could have also been an equal kind of hit. So I'm hoping maybe with the change of genre, maybe capturing some people, I'm hoping this movie has been promoted as well as like at least The Nun. If it opens as well as like The Nun 2 just did, then maybe we'll be in a solid spot. I don't know. Then number 2 I think will be The Nun 2, number 3 The Equalizer 3, number 4 My Big Fat Greek Wedding 3, and then number 5 Jawan, unless this movie vanishes from existence, in which case I'm sorry. But what are your predictions for next week's top 5? Leave them in the comments below, and as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.